So at a certain point, there are two trumpets, which obviously this is not like, these are things that we don't really understand, but these are approximations. And we have this in the Judeo-Christian tradition also. The first blast is what's called the hour, the sa'ah. And I'm going to talk about this on the last lecture I have, which is about the end of time. The moment, it literally means the moment, the great moment when the world comes to an end. And it says in the Quran that like the cosmos was expanded, at the end it will be contracted and rolled up like a scroll, right? Which, the modern physicists talk about the big crunch, which is, when it all goes back to this initial, and that's consistent with the Quranic view that there is a rolling up of the cosmos. And it's also the heat death, because everything it says that the oceans boil over. Everything ends in a massive heat death. So when this moment comes, every person that's on the earth is going to be killed at that point. It's all over. And then the second is the what's called the ba'ath, which is the resurrection. And then what happens then is a very mapped out scenario in the Islamic tradition. At this point, all of the souls have left the dunya. And the next stage they go to, which is the barzakh, and then you have the ba'ath. You have the what's called the nafkha, which causes the resurrection. Now, at the point of resurrection, all of the souls are brought to a plane. And that's what Arafah is, a preparation for that. They're all brought to the plane, and then, according to the tradition, everybody is naked. And they stand, this is where they wait for what's called the hisab, the reckoning. And according to the tradition, it says the waiting is 500 years. And people are in the Quran talks about, a year with God is like 50,000 of years, 1,000 in different verses. So the idea of time is very different in this realm. It's not like it is in where we are here. And according to the Quran, when they're asked how long did they tear in the earth, they'll say a day or a part of a day. That's what our lives on earth will seem like in relation to the next world. Now at this point, according to the Islamic tradition, all of the souls, some are shaded by their actions, and others are literally up in sweat, drowning in their own sweat because it's so intense. And at this point, after waiting an incredible amount of time, and it literally says that people are going in and out, like waves, in and out. There's a lot of confusion. There's a lot of, it's actually, the descriptions are terrifying, with the exception of people that were the good people in this world. And then what happens is people say, let's go ask the prophets to get us out of this. And the tradition says they go to Adam, the first man, and they say, help us, intercede for us. And he says, nafsi, nafsi, my own soul, my own soul. So he refuses. He said, I can't do anything for you. People go to their mother. They go to their father. They say, nafsi, nafsi. This is the day where nobody's thinking about anybody else because the soul is looking at infinity. And in the Quran it says when we enter into this realm, the first thing the soul says is, Ya waylana man ba'athana min marqadina. Oh, woe to us, who has woken us from our sleep? This is what the messengers promised. This is what they told us. They were truthful in telling us this, and this is the promise of the merciful. And they use that attribute because that's what they want now. In the world, people like Thomas Jefferson said, I used to beg for divine justice and still when I looked at others. And then I started examining my own soul and started asking for mercy. Right? So this is the day where people aren't thinking about justice. They're thinking about divine mercy. And what happens is they go to each of the prophets. They go to Noah. They go to Abraham. They go to Moses. Each one of them says, Nafsi, Nafsi. And they give a reason that relates to stories that are mentioned in the Quran. And finally, all of humanity, according to the Islamic tradition, goes to the Prophet Muhammad. All of humanity, the Muslims, the Buddhists, the Hindus, everyone goes to the Prophet Muhammad. And that's why in the Quran he is called a mercy to all the worlds. Because on this day, when they go to him, he, according to our tradition, is uniquely the one who says, Ana laha, this is my place. And he takes the intercession. And it's said that he enters into the divine presence, prostrates, praises, and then it's said to him, raise your head, ask and you will be given, intercede and you will have intercession. And he asks for the judgment because people are so terrified in this waiting period. They just want the judgment to happen. You know, it's like people that would rather just tell me what's going to happen. I can't wait anymore. And so they move to the next stage, which is the hisab, because of this shafa'ah. So the intercession occurs here. Now it's interesting, the Muslims identify in the New Testament, and one of the names of the Prophet in the Islamic tradition is Parakletos, which is the Muslims identify the Paraclete that is mentioned in John 16 in the Gospel when he says, I'm leaving, but another comforter is coming after me. The word in Greek paraclete means comforter, but actually the first meaning of it is intercessor. It's the one who intercedes, who gives comfort. And the Muslims traditionally have believed that that is the Prophet Muhammad. The Christian belief is that it's the Holy Spirit. And at this point, they go now to the reckoning, the hisab. Now, there are people that will not get a hisab. And remember, from the Muslim perspective, all the traditions, the righteous of every tradition is going to be in a good situation on this day. This is not, the Prophet's community is only one community. There are many previous communities of prophets. And those people that were following their prophets, living according, they will all be with their prophet. Each one has their place. And that's why, according to the hadith, they line up behind the people that they were behind, including the bad ones, like false prophets and things. Everybody's going to be with the people they followed. And those people will have the burden of leading people astray. So, the Marxists are going to be behind Karl Marx. It's the Nazis are going to be behind Adolf Hitler. Everybody's going to be with
Who would materialists be behind? Sex sit there.
What's that? What's that? Yeah, big sign, right? Materialists over here. Well, yeah, there's a history of materialism. So there's definitely the first philosophers of materialism. The Greeks have, in fact, if you read, I really like Prometheus Press. I don't know if anybody knows about them. Do you know about Prometheus Press? It's a New York public. They publish everything against religion, right? They're like total materialists, and they can't stand religion. They publish books called like The Problem of God, right? Why I Am Not a Muslim. and they're actually really interesting because it's always important to get reality checks, right, from really radically different perspectives. I like to do that for my own, just, okay, I see how you're seeing it. It's helpful to clarify your own understandings, to listen to something that's so different from what, it's a really good thing to do. So at this point then, at the hisab, which is the reckoning, and this is why there's a hadith that says, reckon yourselves before you're taken to account. In other words, if you do your work in this world, you don't have to deal with it in the next world. So there's a tradition in Islam of what's called muhasabah, and it's also a Christian tradition. There are orders that do this as a practice in Christianity of, at the end of the day, taking oneself to account and really looking at one's actions during the day. If they were good, you praise, and if they're bad, you ask forgiveness. Right? And this is also penitence and confession in the Catholic tradition is going and getting this stuff off your chest, admitting, I did these things, and then having some way of atoning those wrongs. And then what happens is there is a record on this day of everything, your entire life. And according to Imam al-Awza'i, people will watch their lives in front of them like a film. They'll literally watch their entire life. And there's a hadith that God will veil people who ask for his veiling, because having to see your life, all the things that you did. So in other words, there are edited versions, right? There's a divine editing that can take place where things are removed from your life if you ask them to be removed with sincerity. And at each stage, there will be testimony against you. The hands, according to the Quran, testify. The feet testify. They asked him, how will they speak? And he said, the one who gave them, who made your tongue speak will make your hands speak. And the genitals testify, the tongue testifies, because all of them are afraid. The body is, we don't want, they know what's coming, and they're afraid, and so they're all owning up. And they're saying, he made us do this. In other words, they don't want to be taken into account, which is also, there's an indication of this in the Gospels when Jesus said, if your right hand offends thee, then cut it off. For it's better to enter the kingdom of heaven maimed, right, than to go into the fire with that. And that is obviously a spiritual severing. It's not literal, right? I mean, there's probably some people out there that take that stuff.
With the belief of the Muslims, if you convert or if you go to Hajj, all of your sins are...
Yeah, there's a belief that when you enter into Islam, that everything is erased with the exception of debt.
So if that's the case, when you hear this, do they believe that that all those things that happened before, any sins that you have not, they're not there?
They're literally removed from your slate completely. And then what happens is there's what's called a sahifa, which is the book of your life, right? The book of your life. And your actions are weighed in scales. And you'll find this in Egyptian mythology and tradition, in the Egyptian Book of the Dead. And there are many glyphs about this, right? The weighing of the basket and the soul being in the basket and the actions weighed. And, I had the same teacher, Professor Kramer, mentioned that, that isn't that from the Egyptian mythology? And there's absolutely no indication that that information was available in the 7th century in Arabia. And the way the Muslims would look at that is that much of mythology is in fact remnants of prophetic traditions. And in fact, much of mythology, some religious scholars differentiate between mythos and myth. Mythos is truth related in symbolic tradition. And myth is like fables and fairy tales and stories, whereas mythos is something that's true. And so people then are given their books, and the book of their life will either be given in the right hand or in the left hand. If it's given in the right hand, then it's an indication that they were successful in this reckoning. Now, there's also, at this point, there's intercession. So there are people that intercede for other people in all the traditions. The righteous people of the traditions can intercede for other people. And the first who intercede are the prophets. They will intercede for their communities. So Jesus will intercede for the Christians. Moses will intercede for the Jews. And then there are people from the community that reached very high spiritual stations that will be given permission to intercede also.